The train's whistle cut through the Wyoming wind like a knife through bone. Clara Whitmore pressed her face against the frost-covered window, watching the landscape transform from civilization into something raw and unforgiving. For 3 days, she'd been traveling west, leaving behind everything she knew: her students at the Boston Academy for Young Ladies, her modest apartment on Beacon Street, the grave where her parents rested side by side. All of it abandoned for a man who'd promised her the world through carefully crafted letters that now sat folded in her coat pocket, creased from constant rereading. James Blackwell, banker, entrepreneur. The man who'd swept into Boston on business 6 months ago and somehow found his way to the literary salon where Clara spent her Thursday evenings. He'd been different from the other men there: Western, direct, free from the suffocating social rituals that governed Eastern society. When he'd proposed marriage after just 8 weeks, her friends had called her reckless. When she'd accepted, they'd called her foolish. Maybe they'd been right. The train lurched and Clara steadied herself against the window frame. She was 23 years old, possessed exactly $47 to her name, and was wearing her mother's wedding dress under a heavy wool coat because she'd been told there would be a ceremony waiting. James had written that he'd secured a minister, arranged for a reception at the finest hotel in Black Hollow, even purchased a house on the hill overlooking his bank. "Come as you are, my darling Clara," his last letter had read. "Come ready to be my wife, and I'll make certain you never regret choosing the frontier over Boston's tired traditions." The train began to slow. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she gathered her belongings: one carpet bag containing everything she owned, a hat box with her best Sunday hat, and a leather satchel holding her mother's silver brush set, the only valuable thing she possessed. Through the window, Black Hollow materialized from the snow and wind like something from a fever dream. It wasn't a town so much as a collection of buildings fighting against the landscape. Wooden structures huddled together along a single muddy street, their walls weathered gray by relentless wind. A church steeple rose above the others, its white paint peeling in long strips. Beyond the town, the Wyoming wilderness stretched endless and hostile, broken only by distant mountains that looked like teeth against the sky. The train shuddered to a stop. Clara stood, smoothing down her dress with trembling hands. Other passengers pushed past her, rough men in canvas coats, a family with crying children, a woman who looked at Clara's fancy Boston clothes with something between pity and contempt. She waited until the car had mostly cleared before making her way to the exit, each step feeling like walking toward either salvation or doom. The cold hit her like a fist. Boston had winters, certainly, but this was different. This cold had teeth. It bit through her coat, found every gap in her clothing, and reminded her exactly how far she was from anything familiar. The platform was nothing but weathered boards covered in dirty snow. A few people milled about, but none of them were James. Clara set down her bags and scanned the crowd. Perhaps he was running late. Perhaps his bank business had held him up. Perhaps... Clara? Clara Whitmore? She spun toward the voice. A young man in a porter's uniform stood nearby, holding a folded piece of paper. He looked nervous. "Yes, that's me." Relief flooded through her. "Did Mr. Blackwell send you to fetch me?" The porter's expression shifted into something that made Clara's stomach drop. "Ma'am, I was told to give you this." He thrust the paper toward her like it might catch fire. "I'm sorry. I don't know nothing else." Clara took the note with numb fingers. The porter vanished into the crowd before she could ask questions. Around her, the other passengers were being greeted by family, by friends, by people who'd come to collect them. Only Clara stood alone on the platform, holding a piece of paper that felt too light to contain anything good. She unfolded it. The handwriting was James's. She recognized it from his letters. But the words made no sense at first. She had to read them twice before their meaning penetrated the fog of confusion surrounding her. "Clara, I cannot explain in a way that will satisfy you, so I won't try. The marriage cannot proceed. Circumstances have changed. Return to Boston. The banker's draft I left with you should cover your journey. Do not attempt to contact me. J. Blackwell." Clara's hands began to shake. Then her whole body. She read the note again, searching for some hidden meaning, some explanation that would make this make sense. But there was nothing. Just cold words on cold paper delivered by a stranger in the coldest place she'd ever been. "Ma'am? You all right?" An older woman in a threadbare shawl had paused nearby. Her lined face creased with concern. Clara realized she was standing frozen in place, staring at the note like it might rewrite itself. Clara's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, forced steel into her words. I'm fine. Thank you. The woman looked doubtful, but moved on. Clara watched her go, watched everyone go, watched the platform slowly empty as people claimed their passengers and headed into town. The train that had brought her here was already preparing to leave, taking on water and coal for the next leg of its journey. Taking on water and coal, and Clara's blood turned to ice. Through the train windows, in the first-class car, she saw him. James Blackwell sat in a plush seat, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a newspaper in the other. He looked comfortable, wealthy, completely at ease, and sitting beside him, her hand on his arm with the casual intimacy of long familiarity, was a woman Clara had never seen before. Blonde, beautiful, wearing diamonds that caught the winter light. Their eyes met for one terrible second. James's face registered surprise, then something that might have been guilt, then cold indifference. He raised his glass in a mock toast, said something to the woman beside him that made her laugh, and turned his attention back to his newspaper. The train's whistle blew. Clara stood frozen as the great machine began to move, picking up speed, carrying James Blackwell and his lies and his actual life away from Black Hollow Station. Away from her. Away from the wreckage he'd created with less thought than most people gave to discarding trash. The platform was empty now, except for Clara and her bags. And $47. No. Wait. Clara frantically checked her coat pockets, her dress pockets, her carpet bag. She found the letters James had sent her, creased and worn from rereading. She found a pressed flower he'd given her in Boston. She found every stupid romantic keepsake she'd saved like a lovesick fool. But no banker's draft, no ticket money, no anything. He'd lied about that too. Clara's legs gave out. She sat down hard on her trunk, the cold from the frozen wood seeping through her dress. Around her, Black Hollow went about its business, indifferent to the destruction of one foolish woman's entire life. She'd left everything, her job, her apartment, her city, her entire world. She'd written to the academy explaining that she wouldn't be returning. She'd given notice on her rooms. She'd said goodbye to the only life she'd ever known, all for a man who'd looked her in the eye through a train window and raised a glass while abandoning her in the middle of nowhere. The cold bit deeper. Clara forced herself to breathe. To think. She had $47. That was something. In Boston, that might last a month if she was careful. Here? She had no idea. She needed to find a hotel, somewhere to stay while she figured out what to do next. She needed... You lost, miss? Clara looked up. A man stood a few feet away, middle-aged with a sheriff's star pinned to his coat. His expression wasn't exactly friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. Cautious, maybe. Suspicious. Clara stood up, smoothing her dress again, trying to reclaim some dignity. I'm looking for lodging. A hotel, if there is one. The sheriff studied her in a way that made Clara's skin crawl. She recognized that look. She'd seen it before, on men who assumed certain things about women traveling alone. We got the Black Hollow Hotel, end of the street. $1 a night, meals extra. He paused. You meeting someone here or just passing through? There was weight to that question. Clara understood suddenly that her answer mattered, that it would determine how this town saw her. I'm staying, she heard herself say, temporarily, while I sort out my next steps. It wasn't exactly a lie. She just had no idea what those next steps were. The sheriff nodded slowly. Fair enough. Word of advice, though. Town like this. People notice things. Woman alone, no husband, no family. He let the sentence hang. Gets folks talking, just something to be aware of. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Clara with the distinct impression that she'd just been warned. She gathered her belongings and started down the street toward the hotel, her boots crunching in the frozen mud. Black Hollow looked even worse up close. The buildings were shabby, paint peeling, windows cracked. Men stood in clusters, watching her pass with open curiosity. Women whispered behind gloved hands. A dog barked aggressively until its owner kicked it silent. The hotel matched the town. Weathered, tired, barely functional. The lobby smelled of old tobacco and older regret. A woman stood behind the desk, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, looking Clara up and down with the same suspicion the sheriff had shown. Need a room, Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. $1 a night, paid in advance. Meals are extra if you want them. No guests in rooms, no noise after 9, no— The woman's eyes narrowed. Entertaining of any kind. Clara felt her face burn. I don't. Sure you're not. The woman held out her hand. $1. Clara dug into her purse, pulled out a precious dollar bill, and handed it over. The woman gave her a key attached to a wooden tag marked with the number 7. Top floor, end of the hall, outhouse is out back, water pump is in the yard. You want a bath? That's extra. Clara took the key and her bags and climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor. The hallway was dim, lit by a single dirty window at the far end. Her room was barely bigger than a closet, a narrow bed, a washstand, a chair with a broken leg, and a window that looked out over the alley behind the hotel. She set down her bags and sat on the bed. The mattress was thin and lumpy. The room was cold. Through the walls she could hear someone coughing, the sound wet and painful. This was her life now. Clara let herself cry for exactly 5 minutes. She counted the seconds in her head, allowed herself that much weakness, then wiped her face and stood up. Tears solved nothing. Self-pity solved less. She needed to think practically, to assess her situation like the educated woman she was. Facts. She had $47 minus the one she'd just spent. $46. If the room was $1 per night, she could afford 46 days here if she ate nothing. Less than 6 weeks to figure out how to survive in a frontier town that had already marked her as something suspicious. She needed work. But what kind of work could she do here? She was a school teacher, but Black Hollow probably already had one. She could read and write and do arithmetic, but those skills meant little in a place where survival came from physical labor. Clara moved to the window and looked out over the town. Beyond Black Hollow, the wilderness stretched forever, broken only by scattered ranches and homesteads. Somewhere out there, men were building lives through sheer force of will. Women were doing the same, probably, though Clara couldn't imagine how. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it cautiously. The gray-haired woman from the desk stood in the hallway, holding a plate with bread and something that might have been stew. Figured you didn't eat on the train. The woman thrust the plate at Clara. No charge. This once. Before Clara could respond, the woman was already heading back down the hall. Clara looked at the food, her eyes stinging with unexpected emotion. It was the first kindness anyone had shown her since she'd stepped off that train. She sat on the bed and ate slowly, mechanically, barely tasting anything. Through her window, night was falling over Black Hollow. Lamplight flickered in windows. Somewhere, a piano played badly. Voices rose and fell from the saloon down the street. This hostile, frozen place would be her home now, at least until she found a way out. If she found a way out. Clara finished the food, washed her face with water from the pitcher on the washstand, and lay down fully clothed on the narrow bed. The thin blanket did little against the cold. She pulled her coat over her like a second blanket and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would figure out what to do. Tomorrow she would find work, find options, find some path forward through this disaster. Tonight, she just needed to survive. She woke to someone pounding on her door. Clara jerked upright, momentarily disoriented. Gray dawn light filtered through the dirty window. The pounding continued, urgent and angry. Open up! Clara stumbled to the door and cracked it open. The hotel woman stood in the hallway, her face tight with anger. You need to leave. What? I paid for— Sheriff's been asking questions. The woman's voice dropped. About you. About who you're meeting here. About what your business is. I run a respectable establishment, and I don't need that kind of trouble. Clara's stomach dropped. I'm not meeting anyone. I'm not doing anything. Don't care. Pack your things. You got 10 minutes. The door slammed in Clara's face. For a moment, Clara just stood there, processing. Then anger flooded through her, hot and clean and clarifying. She'd done nothing wrong. Nothing. She was the victim here, abandoned and lied to. And somehow, she was being punished for it. But anger solved nothing. Clara packed her bags with shaking hands. 10 minutes later, she was standing on the muddy street in the early morning cold, her entire life contained in a trunk and carpet bag with nowhere to go. A few people were already moving through town, shopkeepers opening stores, workers heading to whatever jobs kept Black Hollow functioning. All of them stared at Clara. Word traveled fast in small towns. By now, everyone probably knew about the woman who'd arrived alone, gotten kicked out of the hotel, and was now standing in the street like trash waiting to be collected. Clara set her jaw and started walking. She had no destination in mind, just a vague idea that she needed to keep moving, to look purposeful, to not appear as lost as she felt. She passed the general store, the blacksmith, the land office. At the edge of town, the buildings gave way to scattered homesteads, and then nothing but frozen grassland. Clara stopped and looked back at Black Hollow. Smoke rose from chimneys. The town was waking up. And she was standing outside of it, a stranger who wasn't even granted the courtesy of basic shelter. "You planning to walk to the next territory?" Clara spun around. A man sat on horseback about 20 feet away, so still that she hadn't noticed him. He was somewhere in his 30s, tall even sitting down, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a leather coat, a hat pulled low against the wind. A rifle rested across his saddle. But it was his eyes that caught Clara, gray as winter sky, hard as flint, and currently studying her with the same neutral assessment someone might give a horse at auction. Clara had no idea what to say. "I'm walking." "Can see that." The man shifted in his saddle. "Question is why? Town's back there." "The town doesn't want me." The words came out bitter. The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. "You the woman who got off the train yesterday? The one who got left?" Clara's face burned. "News travels fast." "Always does." He paused. "Where you headed?" "I don't know." Admitting it out loud felt like defeat, but what was the point of lying? "Away from here, somewhere I can find work." "What kind of work?" "I'm a teacher. Was a teacher. I can read and write and do arithmetic. I can cook, though not for large groups. I can sew, though not quickly." Clara heard herself listing qualifications like she was interviewing for a position, and it made her want to laugh or cry or both. "I can learn whatever needs learning." The man considered this in silence. A long silence. Clara was about to turn and keep walking when he finally spoke. "I need a cook." Clara blinked. "What?" "Cook. For my ranch hands. Woman who did it quit 2 months back, married some farmer from the next territory. Been making do since then, but the food's so bad my best workers are threatening to leave." He paused. "Pays $30 a month plus room and board. Works hard. Hours are long. Men are rough. You'll be the only woman on the property." Clara's mind raced. This could be the answer she needed, or it could be walking into something worse than Black Hollow. She studied the man on horseback, trying to read him. He sat still as stone, expression neutral, waiting for her answer without apparent investment in what it might be. "What's your name?" she asked. "Rhett Callahan." The name meant nothing to Clara, but something in the way he said it suggested it should, like he expected a reaction. "I'm Clara Whitmore." She paused. "Why would you offer work to a complete stranger?" "Because you need it." He said it flat, factual. "And because anyone who'd choose to walk into the wilderness rather than beg from a town that treated her badly has something most people don't." "What's that?" "Pride, stubbornness." A ghost of something that might have been a smile touched his face. Same thing, really, both useful on a ranch. Clara looked back at Black Hollow one more time. Then she looked at the wilderness stretching endlessly before her. Then she looked at Rhett Callahan, this strange man offering her work for reasons she didn't understand. Every choice she'd made recently had been a disaster. James, the journey west, all of it. Maybe it was time to stop trusting her judgment and just take the opportunity in front of her. "All right," she said. "I'll take the job." Rhett nodded once, then swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd been riding since before he could walk. He picked up Clara's trunk like it weighed nothing and secured it behind his saddle. "Ranch is 2 hours' ride from here. We'll need to double up." He held out a hand to help Clara mount. She hesitated. In Boston, riding double with a strange man would be scandalous. But this wasn't Boston, and scandal seemed like a quaint concern compared to freezing or starving. Clara took his hand. It was rough, calloused, warm, and let him help her up onto the horse. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to grip the reins. Hold on, he said. Ranger doesn't like carrying double, and the trail's rough. Before Clara could respond, they were moving. The horse, Ranger, started at a walk, then moved into an easy trot that carried them away from Black Hollow and into the open wilderness. Clara gripped the saddle horn and tried not to think about how close Rhett Callahan was behind her, or how strange this was, or how every mile they traveled took her further from anything familiar. She'd made her choice. Now she'd live with it. The landscape changed as they rode, shifting from the flat grasslands around Black Hollow into something more brutal. Hills rose in frozen waves, dotted with stubborn brush that clung to life despite the wind trying to tear it free. The sky stretched overhead, massive and indifferent, the kind of sky that made Clara understand exactly how small she was. Rhett hadn't spoken since they'd left town. He sat behind her, solid and silent, guiding the horse with small movements Clara could barely detect. She wanted to ask questions about the ranch, about the work, about him, but something in his stillness suggested he wasn't the talking type. After an hour of riding, Clara's back ached and her legs had gone numb from gripping the saddle. The cold had worked its way through her coat and dress, settling into her bones. She tried to shift position without disrupting Rhett's control of the horse. Uncomfortable? His voice rumbled close to her ear. I'm fine. You're shaking. I said I'm fine. A pause, then, ranch is just over that rise, another 20 minutes. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She could endure 20 more minutes. She could endure anything if it meant not sleeping in the street. They crested a hill, and Red Mesa Ranch spread out below them. It wasn't what Clara had expected, though she wasn't sure what she'd expected. The main house was a long, low structure built from rough-hewn timber and stone, weathered by years of frontier wind. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys. Beyond it stood a massive barn, several smaller outbuildings, and a series of corrals where horses moved in restless circles. Further out, cattle dotted the winter-brown hillsides, dark shapes against pale grass. But what struck Clara most was how exposed it all was. The ranch sat in a shallow valley with clear sightlines in every direction, as if someone had deliberately chosen the most defensible position available. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a fortress. Rhett guided Ranger down the slope toward the ranch. As they approached, men emerged from various buildings, ranch hands stopping their work to watch the boss return with an unexpected passenger. Clara counted at least 8 of them, all rough-looking, all staring at her with open curiosity. Rhett brought the horse to a stop in front of the main house and dismounted. He reached up to help Clara down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. 2 hours of riding had turned her muscles to jelly. She grabbed Ranger's saddle for support. You'll get used to it, Rhett said, untying her trunk. I'm sure I will. Clara forced herself to stand straight despite her protesting legs. The ranch hands had drifted closer, forming a loose semicircle. They looked exactly like what Clara imagined cowboys to be, weathered, hard-eyed, dressed in canvas and leather that had seen better days. None of them looked friendly. Boss, one of them said, a tall man with a scarred face and gray streaking his beard. You bring us a guest? She's the new cook. Rhett carried Clara's trunk toward the house like the conversation was over. Cook? Another man laughed, the sound harsh. That fancy thing? She gonna cook us what, Boston tea cakes? Several of the others laughed. Clara felt her face burn but kept her expression neutral. She'd taught teenage boys for 3 years. She knew how to handle mockery. Rhett stopped and turned back. He didn't raise his voice, didn't change his expression, but something shifted in the air. The laughter died. Her name is Miss Whitmore. She's here to work, same as you. Anyone got a problem with that can collect their pay and ride out. Today. Silence. The men shuffled, suddenly very interested in their boots. That's what I thought. Rhett continued toward the house. Tommy, tend to Ranger. Jake, get back to fixing that fence before dark. Rest of you, find something useful to do that doesn't involve standing around with your mouths hanging open. The men scattered. Clara followed Rhett into the house, acutely aware of the eyes tracking her movement. The interior was Spartan. Rough furniture, bare walls, a large stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Everything looked functional, built to last rather than impress. A doorway led to what appeared to be a kitchen. Stairs climbed to a second floor. Rhett set down her trunk. Your room's upstairs, last door on the right. Kitchen's through there. Cookhouse is the building behind the main house. That's where you'll do most of your work. Men eat breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, supper at 6. Sundays they get biscuits and whatever else you can manage. Questions? Clara had about 1,000 questions, but settled on the most practical. What do I cook with? What supplies do you have? Pantry's stocked. Beef, beans, flour, salt pork, whatever else the last cook ordered. Running low on some things. We'll send someone to town next week for supplies. You need something specific, write it down. How many men? 12, counting me. Sometimes more if we bring in extra hands for roundup or branding. 12 men. Clara had cooked for herself and occasionally for small dinner parties in Boston. Cooking for 12 rough cowboys who probably expected meat and potatoes at every meal was something else entirely. I'll do my best, she said, because what else could she say? Rhett studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes missing nothing. You scared? Yes. Honesty seemed like the only option with this man. Good. Means you're paying attention. He moved toward the door. Get yourself settled. Tomorrow morning you start. 5 o'clock sharp. Men start work at dawn, and they work better fed. He left, closing the door behind him with a definitive thud. Clara stood alone in the strange house, listening to the wind howl around the eaves. She climbed the stairs, her legs protesting every step, and found her room. It was small, but clean. A narrow bed with an actual mattress, a washstand, a chair, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. Compared to the hotel room in Black Hollow, it might as well have been a palace. Clara unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on pegs driven into the wall, arranging her mother's brush set on the washstand. The familiar objects looked strange here, too delicate for this rough place. She looked strange here. Everything about this was wrong, but wrong beat freezing in the street. A knock at the door made her turn. She opened it to find a boy standing in the hallway. Couldn't have been more than 16, all gangly limbs and nervous energy. Ma'am, I'm Tommy. Mr. Callahan said to show you the cookhouse and pantry, if you're ready. Clara wasn't ready for anything, but she nodded anyway. Lead the way. Tommy practically ran down the stairs. Clara followed at a more measured pace, her city boots slipping on the worn wood. Outside, the temperature had dropped even further. The sun was already sinking toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. The cookhouse was exactly what it sounded like, a building dedicated to feeding large numbers of people. A massive cast-iron stove dominated one wall, its surface scarred from years of use. Long tables filled the center of the room, flanked by rough benches. Shelves lined the walls, holding tin plates, cups, and utensils. Pantry's back here, Tommy said, leading her through another door. The pantry was better stocked than Clara had expected. Sacks of flour and cornmeal, beans and barrels, salt pork hanging from hooks, tins of various supplies. Whoever had stocked this knew what they were doing. Last cook, Mrs. Henderson. She left about 2 months back, Tommy offered, his voice echoing in the small space. Got married, moved to Montana. Since then, we've been taking turns trying to feed everyone. Mostly it's been awful. What have you been eating? Burned beans, undercooked beef, bread so hard you could use it for a building brick. Yesterday, Jake tried to make stew and somehow set the whole thing on fire. Don't know how you burn stew, but Jake managed it. Despite everything, Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. I'll try to do better than fire. Anything would be better. Tommy hesitated. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, where'd you come from? Mr. Callahan, he don't usually just bring people back from town. Clara considered how much to share. Boston. I came west for reasons that didn't work out. Mr. Callahan offered me work when I needed it. Tommy nodded like this made perfect sense. He does that sometimes, brings in strays. That's how I got here. My folks died of fever 3 years back, left me with nothing. Mr. Callahan found me trying to steal a horse and offered me a job instead of a hanging. Jake was running from some bad business in Colorado. Most of the men here, they got stories like that. Mr. Callahan, he don't care much about where you've been, just what you can do. This information settled over Clara like a blanket. Uncomfortable, but warming. She wasn't the only person here trying to escape a past. What about Mr. Callahan? She asked. What's his story? Tommy's expression shifted, became guarded. That ain't my story to tell, ma'am. But I'll say this. He's hard, but he's fair. Treats his people right, and he don't lie, which is more than you can say for most folks. The contrast to James hit Clara like a slap. One man who'd lied with every breath, and one who apparently made honesty a virtue. She didn't know which was more dangerous. "Thanks for showing me around, Tommy." "Yes, ma'am. You need anything, just holler." I bunk in the barn with most of the other hands. After Tommy left, Clara stood in the cookhouse and tried to imagine feeding 12 men breakfast in 11 hours. The stove was bigger than anything she'd worked with. The quantities would be massive, and she'd be doing it all alone, probably with the men watching her every move, waiting for her to fail. The smart thing would be to start preparing now. Figure out what she could make, what ingredients she had, how the stove worked. But exhaustion had settled into Clara's bones, making even simple thoughts feel heavy. She made her way back to the main house and up to her room. Through her window, she could see the ranch settling into evening routines. Men moved between buildings. Lanterns flickered to life. Somewhere, a horse whinnied. The sounds were foreign and familiar at once, different from Boston but containing the same rhythm of people going about their lives. Clara lay down on the bed without undressing, too tired to manage buttons and laces. Tomorrow she would wake before dawn and try to become someone she'd never been. Tonight, she just needed to rest. Sleep came hard and restless, full of dreams about trains pulling away and men who turned to smoke when she tried to reach them. Someone was ringing a bell. Clara jerked awake in complete darkness, momentarily lost. The bell kept clanging, insistent and loud. She stumbled to her window and saw a figure in the yard below, silhouetted against a lantern, pulling a rope attached to a bell mounted on a post. 4:30. The men would expect food in 30 minutes. Clara dressed faster than she ever had, her fingers fumbling with buttons in the dark. She grabbed her shawl and ran downstairs out into the frigid pre-dawn air, across the yard to the cookhouse. Her breath came in white clouds. Stars still filled the sky, hard and bright, and offering no warmth. The cookhouse was dark and cold. Clara found matches and lit lanterns, then stood staring at the massive stove like it was a dragon she needed to tame. She'd watched the stove in her Boston apartment light easily enough, but this was different. This was cast iron and serious business. She found kindling and larger wood stacked nearby, managed to get a fire started in the stove's belly. While it heated, she assessed her resources. Eggs. She could do eggs. Bacon. She could fry bacon. Biscuits. She'd made biscuits exactly 3 times in her life, but desperate times called for attempted baking. Clara worked with single-minded focus, falling back on what little cooking knowledge she possessed. The bacon went into a large cast-iron skillet, the eggs into another. For the biscuits, she mixed flour and salt and what she hoped was the right amount of lard, kneading the dough with hands that shook from nerves more than cold. The biscuits went into the oven. The bacon started to sizzle and pop. The eggs. Clara realized too late that she had no idea how 12 cowboys liked their eggs. Scrambled seemed safest. She started cracking them into a bowl, lost count somewhere around 20, and kept going until the bowl was full. Men began arriving just as the sun cracked the horizon. They filed in silently, taking seats at the long tables, watching her move around the cookhouse like they were spectators at some strange performance. Clara felt their eyes on her back, judging every movement. She plated the food as quickly as she could, bacon, scrambled eggs, and biscuits that had come out of the oven looking somehow both burned and undercooked simultaneously. She set the plates on the table without ceremony. The men looked at the food, then at each other. Then at Rhett, who sat at the head of the table with the same neutral expression he'd worn since Clara met him. He took a bite of egg, chewed, swallowed. "It's food," he said flatly. "Eat it." The men dug in. Clara stood by the stove, trying not to watch them too obviously. Some ate quickly, mechanically, like fuel was fuel and taste didn't matter. Others ate more slowly, their expressions suggesting they'd had worse but hoped for better. One man, the one with the scarred face who'd mocked her yesterday, bit into a biscuit. His jaw worked for a moment, then he set the biscuit down carefully. "Ma'am, no disrespect, but this biscuit could stop a bullet." Heat flooded Clara's face. "I'm aware the biscuits aren't ideal. I'll do better tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Another man laughed. "We supposed to eat rocks until you figure it out?" "Hey now," Tommy's young voice cut across the room. "She's trying. That's more than the rest of us managed. Trying don't fill a belly, boy." "No," Rhett said quietly, "but respect costs nothing. Miss Whitmore is learning. You all had to learn your jobs once, too. I remember Jake here couldn't rope a fence post his first month. Took him 3 tries to brand a calf without getting kicked. Jake had the grace to look embarrassed. She stays, Rhett continued. She'll get better. Any man who doesn't like it knows where the door is. Silence settled over the cookhouse. The men returned to eating, slower now, more careful about their complaints. Clara stood frozen by the stove, humiliated and grateful in equal measure. After breakfast, the men filed out to start their workday. Clara began the enormous task of cleaning up, her hands shaking as she scrubbed plates in the large wash basin. She'd failed. Her first meal, and she'd already proven them right. She was some useless city woman who couldn't even make a decent biscuit. Miss Whitmore? She turned. Rhett stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands. That wasn't good, he said, brutally honest. But it wasn't as bad as what we've been eating. The eggs were fine, the bacon was fine, the biscuits... He paused, something that might have been humor flickering across his face. Need work. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be better. He settled his hat back on his head. You got access to the pantry. Try different recipes. Practice. Men complain, but they'll eat anything that doesn't poison them. You'll figure it out. He left before Clara could respond. She spent the rest of the morning preparing for the midday meal, trying variations on simple dishes. Beef stew seemed manageable. Meat, potatoes, carrots, onions, water, salt. Hard to mess up, she hoped. The stew turned out edible, if not impressive. The men ate it without much complaint. Clara took that as a small victory. Supper was more of the same: fried beef, beans, cornbread that came out slightly better than the morning's biscuits. The men ate. No one praised the food, but no one threw it at her either. By the time Clara finished cleaning the cookhouse that night, every muscle in her body screamed. Her hands were raw from scrubbing. Her feet ached from standing for 16 hours straight. She smelled like wood smoke and bacon grease. She stumbled back to the main house and up to her room, collapsed on her bed still fully dressed, and slept like someone had hit her with a hammer. The bell woke her at 4:30. The second day was marginally better than the first. The third day, she managed biscuits that were merely bad instead of lethal. By the end of the first week, Clara had established a brutal routine. Wake at 4:30, cook breakfast, clean, prepare dinner, clean, prepare supper, clean, collapse into bed around 8 o'clock, then wake and do it all again. The men slowly stopped openly mocking her. Some even started offering gruff advice. Jake, the one who'd burned stew, showed her how to properly maintain the cookhouse stove. Tommy helped her haul water from the pump. An older man named Sam, who spoke rarely, left a handwritten recipe for sourdough bread on the cookhouse table one morning. But they still didn't trust her. Clara could feel it in how they watched her, like she was temporary, someone who'd quit once the reality of frontier life truly sank in. The second week, a snowstorm rolled in. Clara woke to find the ranch yard buried under 2 feet of fresh powder, more still falling in sheets so thick she could barely see the barn. She struggled through the drifts to the cookhouse, her boots filling with snow, her shawl useless against the wind. The cookhouse was freezing. The stove had gone cold overnight, and in these temperatures, getting it relit was brutal. Clara's fingers went numb as she worked with kindling and matches. The first 3 attempts failed. The fourth finally caught, but barely. She huddled close to the stove, trying to thaw her hands enough to cook. The men would still expect breakfast. Storm or no storm, cattle needed tending, animals needed feeding, and ranch hands needed fuel for that work. Clara managed a basic breakfast. Oatmeal, bacon, coffee, strong enough to strip paint. The men arrived late, covered in snow, their faces red from the cold. They ate quickly and silently, then disappeared back into the storm. All except Rhett. He stood by the stove warming his hands. Storm's going to last at least 2 days, probably longer. What does that mean? Means everyone stays close to the ranch. Means animals need extra attention. Means you're going to be cooking a lot of hot food for a lot of cold men. Clara looked at the cookhouse, at the supplies, at the massive stove that fought her every time she tried to cook on it. 2 days. She could manage 2 days. The storm lasted 5. By the third day, Clara had developed a system. By the fourth, she'd stopped sleeping more than a few hours at a time because men needed food at odd hours when they came in from tending the livestock. By the 5th day, she was moving in a fog of exhaustion, cooking without thinking, her hands working automatically. On the morning of the 6th day, the storm finally broke. Clara stood in the doorway of the cookhouse, looking out at a world transformed. Snow blanketed everything, pristine and beautiful, and absolutely exhausting to contemplate. The men would need to dig out. The animals would need extra care. The work would be relentless. Still standing, Clara turned. Rhett stood behind her, covered in snow from early morning chores. Barely, she admitted. That counts. He moved past her into the cookhouse, poured himself coffee. Lost 2 head of cattle to the cold. Could have been worse. Men are tired, but healthy. No frostbite, no injuries. You kept them fed through the worst storm we've had in 3 years. That's not nothing. It was the closest thing to praise Clara had heard from him. She felt something warm bloom in her chest, quickly followed by suspicion. Why do I feel like you're about to tell me something bad? That ghost of a smile crossed his face. Because you're learning how things work here. We need to restock supplies. Storm went through our stores faster than expected. Someone needs to ride to Black Hollow tomorrow. Clara's stomach dropped. I'm not going back there. Didn't figure you would. I'm going, taking Tommy and Jake with me. We'll be gone 2 days, maybe 3 if the roads are bad. He paused. Means you're in charge while I'm gone. In charge of what? The ranch, the men, everything. Clara stared at him. That's insane. I barely know what I'm doing in the cookhouse, and you want me to run the entire ranch? Sam will handle the cattle operations. You just need to keep the men fed and the house running. Anyone acts up, you tell them I'll deal with it when I get back. Rhett finished his coffee. You've survived 2 weeks here. That's longer than most expected. Time to trust you with more responsibility. What if something goes wrong? Then you figure it out, same as you've been doing. He left before she could argue further. The next morning, Clara watched Rhett, Tommy, and Jake ride out toward Black Hollow, their horses struggling through the deep snow. As they disappeared over the rise, a cold certainty settled over her. Something would go wrong. Something always went wrong. She just didn't know what yet. The first day without Rhett passed smoothly enough. Clara cooked, the men worked, the ranch continued functioning. The second day started the same way. Then, just after the midday meal, Sam burst into the cookhouse. Miss Whitmore, we got a problem. Clara's hands stilled over the dishwater. What kind of problem? 3 riders coming in from the north, moving fast. Don't recognize them, and they ain't got the look of honest men. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. What do we do? Sam's weathered face was grim. That depends on what they want. But Miss Whitmore, you should know something. Before he left, Mr. Callahan told me if anything happened while he was gone, you were in charge. Not me, you. Said if there was trouble, you make the call on how we handle it. That's insane. I don't know anything about... Don't matter what you know. Matters what you decide. Sam headed for the door. They'll be here in 10 minutes. Best figure out what you're going to say to them. He left Clara standing alone in the cookhouse, her hands dripping dishwater onto the floor, her mind racing. 3 strange riders. 10 minutes. And somehow, impossibly, she was the one who had to decide what happened next. She looked around the cookhouse at the familiar space that had become her domain through brutal repetition and exhaustion. 2 weeks ago, she'd been standing on a frozen train platform with nothing. Now she was responsible for an entire ranch. Clara dried her hands and walked out into the cold afternoon air. The other hands had gathered near the barn, watching the horizon. She could see the riders now, dark shapes against the white snow, coming fast. Miss Whitmore. One of the younger hands, a man named Pete, stood nearby. What do you want us to do? Clara had no idea, but standing there looking helpless wasn't an option. Get the rifles from the house, she heard herself say. Don't aim them, just have them visible. Show we're prepared. Everyone stays calm. Let me talk to them first. The men scattered to follow her orders. Clara stood in the center of the ranch yard, her heart pounding, and watched 3 strangers ride toward her small, strange, impossible new life. The riders came to a stop 20 feet away. They looked exactly like the kind of men Sam had warned her about. Hard faces, worn clothes, guns visible on their hips. The one in the center, older than the others with a beard gone gray, studied the ranch with calculating eyes. This Red Mesa? He asked. It is. Looking for Rhett Callahan. He's not here. The man's eyes narrowed. When's he back? That's not your business. The man's companions shifted in their saddles. One of them laughed, low and ugly. She's got spirit, I'll give her that. You alone here, girl? Clara felt the ranch hands tense behind her. I'm not alone, and I'm not a girl. If you have business with Mr. Callahan, you can come back when he's here. If you don't have business, you can leave now. The bearded man studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, showing too many missing teeth. Tell Callahan that Marcus Boone came calling. Tell him his brother sends his regards from the territorial prison. Tell him accounts need settling. He wheeled his horse around. The other two followed. They rode back the way they'd come, not fast but not slow either. Men who had all the time in the world and wanted everyone to know it. Clara stood frozen until they disappeared over the horizon. Then her legs gave out. She sat down hard in the snow, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Sam appeared at her side. You did good, Miss Whitmore. Real good. Kept your head, didn't show fear, sent them packing without bloodshed. Who was that? What did they want? Sam's expression darkened. That's a conversation for when Mr. Callahan gets back, but I'll tell you this, you just handled something most men would have botched. Whatever you were before you came here, you're becoming something else now. Clara looked at her hands, trembling in her lap. Sam was right. She was becoming something else. She just had no idea if that was good or bad. Rhett returned the next afternoon, his horse lathered and breathing hard like he'd pushed it the entire way back. Clara was in the cookhouse preparing supper when she heard the commotion in the yard. Men shouting, horses whinnying, the sound of boots hitting frozen ground. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped outside. Rhett was already surrounded by ranch hands, all of them talking at once. His eyes found hers across the crowd, and something in his expression made her stomach clench. Everyone back to work, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. Miss Whitmore, with me. Clara followed him into the main house. He didn't speak until they were in his office, a small room off the main living area that Clara had never entered before. Maps covered the walls. A desk sat piled with ledgers and papers. A gun cabinet stood in the corner, locked. Rhett turned to face her. Sam sent word about the visitors. Tell me exactly what happened. Clara recounted the encounter, trying to remember every detail. The three men. Marcus Boone? The message about his brother and settling accounts. Rhett's face remained neutral throughout, but his hands curled into fists at his sides. What did I do wrong? Clara asked when she finished. Nothing. You did everything right. Rhett moved to the window, staring out at the ranch. But you need to understand what you walked into the middle of. 6 months ago, 3 men tried to steal cattle from Red Mesa. They weren't just rustlers. They were part of a gang that's been terrorizing ranches across the territory. We caught them, there was a fight, and one of them died. His name was Cole Boone. Claire's chest tightened. Marcus Boone's brother. The same. The other 2 went to prison. Marcus wasn't with them that night, but he's the worst of the lot. Smart, vicious, and patient. The kind of man who'll wait months to get his revenge and make sure it hurts when he does. What does he want? Me dead, probably. The ranch burned. Everyone here punished for what happened to his brother. Rhett's jaw worked. I should have been here. Shouldn't have left you to deal with that. You couldn't have known they'd come. I should have assumed they would. That's how you survive out here. Assume the worst and prepare for it. He turned back to face her. They'll come back. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, but they'll come. And when they do, it won't be for conversation. Fear slithered down Clara's spine, but she kept her voice steady. What do we do? We prepare. Double the watch. Make sure everyone's armed. Secure the livestock in the near corrals. And you, he paused, you need to decide if you want to stay or if I should send you back to Black Hollow before this gets ugly. The question hung in the air between them. Clara thought about Black Hollow, about the hotel that had thrown her out, about the people who'd looked at her like she was trash. Then she thought about Red Mesa, about the men who'd slowly started accepting her, about the work she'd done to earn her place here. I'm staying. Rhett studied her face. This isn't cooking biscuits, Miss Whitmore. Men might die. You might die. I understand. Do you? Because there's no shame in choosing safety. There's shame in running when people are depending on me. Clara lifted her chin. You offered me shelter when I had nothing. These men have started to trust me. I'm not abandoning them because things got dangerous. Something shifted in Rhett's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. All right then. You stay. But from now on, you follow my orders exactly. No arguments, no hesitation. Clear? Clear. Good. Now get back to the cookhouse. Men need to eat, and they need to see you're not rattled. That matters more than you'd think. Clara returned to cooking, but the atmosphere on the ranch had changed. Men moved with new tension, checking their weapons, watching the horizon. The easy banter during meals disappeared, replaced by clipped conversations and nervous glances. That night, Rhett doubled the watch. Clara lay in her bed upstairs, listening to the sound of boots pacing in the yard below, and tried not to imagine what Marcus Boone might do when he returned. 2 days passed. Then 3. Then a week. The tension didn't ease. If anything, it grew worse. Waiting for violence was somehow more exhausting than violence itself. Clara threw herself into work. She cooked, she cleaned, she learned to bake bread that didn't taste like saddle leather. In the evenings, after the supper dishes were done, she'd find herself sitting in the main house while Rhett worked through ranch ledgers. Neither of them spoke much, but the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. One night, almost 2 weeks after Marcus Boone's visit, Clara found Rhett in his office with a book instead of ledgers. She paused in the doorway, surprised. "Didn't take you for a reader," she said. He looked up, almost guilty, then seemed to decide there was no point hiding it. "Not much else to do after dark besides drink or read. I prefer reading." Clara moved closer, curious. The book was poetry. Walt Whitman, worn from repeated reading. It seemed impossibly out of place in Rhett's scarred hands. "Leaves of Grass," she said. "I taught that to my students in Boston. Most of them hated it. Most people do. Too honest for polite society." Rhett closed the book. "Your students ever understand it?" "A few. The ones who felt too big for their circumstances. The ones who wanted more than what they'd been given." "That why you came west? Wanted more?" Clara leaned against the doorframe. "I came west because I was stupid enough to believe a liar. But yes, I wanted more. Or different, at least. Boston felt like wearing a dress 2 sizes too small. Technically it fit, but I couldn't breathe in it. And now? Now I'm wearing a dress covered in flour and grease stains, cooking for men who complained about my biscuits for a week straight on a ranch that might get attacked by outlaws any day." Clara found herself smiling despite everything. "Somehow that feels more honest than anything I did back east." Rhett's expression softened in a way Clara had never seen before. "You're not what I expected when I offered you that job." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd quit after 3 days. Someone who'd need constant protecting. Someone who'd look at ranch life and run back to civilization." He paused. "Instead, you handled a blizzard, faced down armed men, and made yourself part of this place through sheer stubbornness." "I'm not sure that's a compliment." "It is. Out here, stubborn keeps you alive when smart gives up." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked away. "I should let you get back to your reading." "Wait." Rhett stood, pulled a small pistol from his desk drawer. "You should have this. Keep it in your room. If trouble comes and I'm not around, you'll need more than sharp words to protect yourself." Clara stared at the gun. "I've never fired a weapon in my life." "Then tomorrow I'll teach you. Can't have you going up against outlaws without knowing which end is dangerous." He pressed the pistol into her hand. It was heavier than she expected, cold and brutal and real. Clara's fingers closed around it automatically. "Thank you," she managed. Rhett nodded and sat back down with his book. Clara returned to her room, placed the pistol on her washstand, and lay awake for hours staring at it. The frontier was making her into someone she didn't recognize, someone who cooked for a dozen cowboys, who stood up to armed strangers, who now kept a weapon by her bed like it was the most natural thing in the world. She wasn't sure if this new version of herself was better or worse than the Boston schoolteacher she'd been. Just different. And maybe that was enough. The next morning, after breakfast was cleared, Rhett took Clara out behind the barn with an armful of empty bottles. He lined them up on fence posts while Clara stood holding the pistol like it might explode. "First rule," Rhett said, "always assume it's loaded. Second rule, never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot. Third rule, when you need to use it, don't hesitate." He moved behind her, adjusted her grip, showed her how to aim. His hands were rough but careful, his voice patient in a way she hadn't expected from him. "Now squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Squeeze." Clara squeezed. The gun kicked hard. the shot going wide and hitting nothing but air. The sound echoed across the ranch, loud enough to make her ears ring. Again. She fired again, and again, and again. By the 10th shot, her hands were shaking and her ears hurt, and she'd managed to hit exactly one bottle, more from luck than skill. "That's enough for today," Rhett said. "You're flinching before you shoot, anticipating the kick. You'll get better with practice." "I hit 1 bottle out of 10. That's terrible." "That's 1 more than you could have hit yesterday." He collected the remaining bottles. "Besides, if someone's close enough that you need this gun, you won't need to be a sharpshooter. You just need to be willing to pull the trigger." Clara looked at the pistol in her hand, then at Rhett. "Have you killed men?" The question came out before she could stop it. Rhett's face went carefully blank. "Yes." "Does it get easier?" "No. Anyone who says it does is lying or broken." He met her eyes. "But sometimes it's necessary. And when it is, you don't think about easy or hard. You think about surviving." They walked back toward the ranch in silence. Clara wanted to ask more. How many men? What circumstances? Did he dream about them? But she sensed those questions crossed a line Rhett wasn't ready for her to cross. That afternoon, while Clara was kneading bread dough in the cookhouse, Tommy burst through the door. "Miss Whitmore, you better come quick. Jake and Pete are about to kill each other." Clara followed him outside to find 2 of the ranch hands in the yard, circling each other with fists raised. The other men had formed a loose circle around them, some shouting encouragement, some trying to calm things down. "What's this about?" Clara demanded. "Jake said Pete's been shirking his work," one of the men offered. "Pete took offense." "So they're going to fight about it?" "That's generally how these things get settled out here, ma'am." Clara looked around for Rhett or Sam, but neither was in sight. They'd ridden out earlier to check on the far pastures, which meant once again she was the one who had to handle this. She stepped between the 2 men. "Miss Whitmore, you should move," Jake said, breathing hard. "This ain't your concern." "Everything on this ranch is my concern when Mr. Callahan isn't here. Now one of you explain what happened." "He called me lazy," Pete snarled. "Said I ain't pulling my weight." "Because you ain't," Jake shot back. "Rest of us are working ourselves to death preparing for trouble, and you're disappearing for hours at a time." "That true?" Clara asked Pete. Pete's face flushed red. "I've been doing my jobs." "After you finish hiding in the barn for half the morning," Jake said. The other men shifted uncomfortably. No one contradicted Jake. "Pete," Clara said carefully, "if there's a reason you're struggling with the work, we can figure something out. But if you're avoiding it while everyone else picks up your slack, that's not fair to them." "You don't understand nothing," Pete spat. "You're just some city woman playing ranch hand. Don't pretend you know what it's like out here." The words hit harder than Clara expected. She'd been working herself raw for weeks, earning acceptance inch by painful inch. And with one sentence, Pete had dismissed all of it. "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't know what it's like to have grown up on the frontier. I don't know what it's like to work cattle or break horses or any of the things you all do. But I know what it's like to show up and work hard every day. I know what it's like to earn my place instead of coasting on what came before." She looked around at the assembled men. "Anyone here think I haven't earned my wages?" Silence. Even the men who'd mocked her the most couldn't argue with the work she'd done. "Thought so." Clara turned back to Pete. "You want to keep your job, you work. You don't want to work, you leave. Those are the only 2 choices. Decide now." Pete stood frozen, anger and shame warring across his face. Finally, he spun on his heel and stalked toward the barn. "That's it?" Jake called after him. "You just walking away?" "Let him go," Clara said. "He'll either come back ready to work or he'll pack his things. Either way, the problem's solved." The crowd dispersed slowly. Clara returned to the cookhouse, her hands shaking now that the confrontation was over. She'd just dressed down a grown man in front of his peers, and she had no idea if she'd handled it right. Sam found her an hour later. Pete left, took his horse and his gear, rode out without a word to anyone. Clara's stomach sank. "I shouldn't have pushed him like that." "You did exactly right. A man who won't work don't belong on a ranch, especially not when trouble's coming. Better to know it now than discover it when we need him." Sam paused. "But we're down a hand. We were already stretched thin. This makes it worse." "I'll pick up the slack." "You're already working 16 hours a day, Miss Whitmore." Then I'll work 18. Sam looked like he wanted to argue, but just shook his head and left. Clara stared at the bread dough she'd been working, then slammed her fist into it. The dough yielded without resistance, which made her want to hit it again. She was tired. She was scared. She was in way over her head, and she'd just driven off one of the ranch hands through pride or stupidity, or both. But she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Clara shaped the dough into loaves with mechanical precision, shoved them into the oven, and moved on to the next task. Work had become her anchor. As long as she kept moving, kept cooking, kept contributing, she could ignore the voice in her head that kept asking what she'd gotten herself into. That night, Rhett returned and was informed about Pete's departure. He listened without expression, then called Clara into his office. Sam told me what happened. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. You did the right thing. Rhett leaned against his desk. Pete was trouble waiting to happen. Better to cut him loose now than have him fold when things get rough. We're down a man because of me. We're down a man who is useless. That's a net gain. Rhett's eyes softened slightly. You're learning to make hard calls. That's good. It's necessary. But it takes a toll. I see it on you. Clara wanted to deny it, to insist she was fine, but exhaustion made lying impossible. I'm tired. I know. And it's about to get worse. Her stomach dropped. What happened? Got word from a rancher east of here. Marcus Boone and his men hit their place 2 nights ago, burned the barn, scattered the livestock, beat the owner half to death. Left a message saying they were working their way west. Working their way to us. Yes. Clara sank into the chair across from Rhett's desk. How long do we have? Day or 2 at most. They're not hiding anymore. They want me to know they're coming. Why not go to the sheriff? Get the law involved? Rhett's laugh was bitter. The sheriff in Black Hollow? That man wouldn't cross the street to stop a murder if it meant leaving his comfortable office. And the territorial marshal is 3 days' ride away in Cheyenne. By the time he got here, it would all be over. So we're on our own. We've always been on our own out here. The law is what you make it, and justice is what you can enforce. Rhett pulled a map from his desk drawer, spread it across the surface. They'll come from the north. It's the easiest approach. Good cover until they're close. We'll need lookouts posted here and here. The ranch hands will take defensive positions around the main buildings. Livestock gets moved into the far pastures where they're harder to scatter. Anything valuable that can be hidden gets hidden. Clara studied the map, trying to make sense of the lines and markings. Where do you want me? In the main house with the rifle I'm going to give you. If they breach the outer defenses, you're the last line. I can do more than hide. I know you can, but I need someone I trust holding the house. That's you. The words settled over Clara like a weight and a gift at once. Trust. Rhett Callahan trusted her. All right, she said. I'll hold the house. Good. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we prepare. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Claire returned to her room, but sleep felt impossible. She sat by her window, watching the ranch settle into an uneasy night, and wondered if she'd see the sunrise after tomorrow. The next day was controlled chaos. Men moved with urgent purpose, fortifying positions, checking weapons, moving livestock. Clara cooked constantly. If these men were going into a fight, they'd do it on full stomachs. She also went through the house, identifying anything valuable enough to hide. Ledgers went into a floor safe in Rhett's office. The good china, not that there was much, got wrapped and stored in the cellar. Clara found a small wooden box in Rhett's desk containing letters and a photograph. The photograph showed a younger Rhett with a woman who had his eyes. His mother, probably. Clara carefully hid the box in the back of a cabinet. As the sun began to set, the ranch went quiet. Men took up their positions. Lamps were extinguished. The only light came from a small fire in the main house, banked low. Clara sat in the living room with a rifle across her lap, feeling ridiculous and terrified and strangely calm. Rhett had shown her how to load it, how to aim, how to fire. She wasn't good at it, but she could probably hit someone if they were close enough. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Clara's eyes burned from staring into the darkness, but she didn't dare sleep. Then, just before 2 a.m, a shout from outside. Riders! Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. She moved to the window, staying back from the glass. In the darkness, she could make out shapes moving, more than 3 riders this time. 6, maybe 7. They'd brought reinforcements. The first gunshot shattered the night. It came from somewhere near the barn, followed immediately by more shots. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. Men shouted. Horses screamed. Clara gripped the rifle so hard her hands ached. She wanted to run outside to see what was happening, but Rhett's orders had been clear. Hold the house. More gunshots. Something crashed. Then Tommy's voice, panicked and young. "The barn's on fire!" Clara ran to the back's window. Orange flames were already climbing the barn walls, fed by dry wood and winter hay. Men were running toward it with buckets, but the fire was spreading too fast. Then she heard it, the sound of breaking glass from somewhere downstairs. Someone was in the house. Clara's breath caught. She moved to the stairs as quietly as she could, the rifle raised. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. A shadow moved in the kitchen. "Rhett," she called, her voice barely a whisper. The shadow stepped into view. It wasn't Rhett. It was a man Clara didn't recognize, wearing a bandana over his face, a gun in his hand. They saw each other at the same moment. The man raised his gun. Clara's training took over. She aimed, squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard. The shot went wide, but close enough to make the man duck. He fired back. The bullet splintered the railing near Clara's head. She chambered another round like Rhett had taught her, fired again. This time, she didn't miss. The man went down hard, cursing. Clara stood frozen, the rifle smoking in her hands. She just shot someone, a person. A living, breathing person who was now lying on her kitchen floor, bleeding. The man tried to get up. Clara aimed the rifle at him with shaking hands. "Don't move." He looked at her, his eyes visible above the bandana, and something like respect crossed his face. "You got steel in you, woman. Didn't expect that." "Where's the rest of your gang?" "Outside, dealing with your friends. Boss wanted me to torch the house, but I'm thinking maybe that's not happening now." More gunshots outside. Someone was screaming. Clara wanted to help, wanted to run out there, but she couldn't leave this man here unwatched. "You're going to tie yourself up," she said, "or I'm going to shoot you again. Those are your options." The man laughed, pained. "You're something else, lady. All right, you got rope?" Clara directed him to some rope in the pantry, never taking the rifle off him. He tied his own feet, then held out his hands. Clara approached carefully, keeping distance between them, and secured his wrists. It probably wasn't a great job. She'd never tied anyone up before, but it would have to do. She dragged a heavy chair in front of the kitchen door to slow anyone else coming through, then returned to the window. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the sky. But the men had stopped trying to fight the fire and were instead fighting the attackers. Clara could see Rhett near the corrals, his rifle firing in sharp cracks. Sam was somewhere near the bunkhouse. Jake was... Movement near the barn caught Clara's eye. 3 men, using the fire as cover, were circling around toward the house, toward her. Clara's mind raced. She was alone here. The man she'd shot was incapacitated. Rhett and the others were pinned down by the main fighting. No one was coming to help. She looked at the rifle in her hands, then at the 3 men getting closer. She'd hit one target at close range in a panic. 3 men in the dark from a distance was something else entirely. But she was done running, done hiding, done being the victim. Clara positioned herself at the front window, cracked it open for a better shot, and aimed at the closest man. She fired. The man dropped. Clara didn't know if she'd hit him or if he'd just taken cover, and she didn't wait to find out. She chambered another round, aimed at the second man, fired. This time she definitely hit him. He spun and went down. The 3rd man had spotted her now. He was running toward the house, firing as he came. Bullets shattered the window above Clara's head. She dropped, covered her face against the falling glass. The front door exploded inward. The man crashed through, wild-eyed and violent. Clara tried to bring the rifle up, but he was too close, too fast. He knocked it from her hands and grabbed her by the throat. "Uppity woman," he snarled. "Should have stayed in your kitchen." Clara couldn't breathe. Black spots danced across her vision. Her hands clawed at his grip uselessly. Then she remembered the pistol. She'd tucked it into her pocket before taking up position. Her fingers found it, closed around it, pulled it free. She jammed the pistol against the man's ribs and pulled the trigger. The shot was muffled by his body. He made a shocked sound and his grip loosened. Clara pulled the trigger again and again. The man collapsed on top of her. Clara shoved him off, gasping for air, her throat burning. The pistol fell from her shaking hands. She'd just killed someone. Not wounded, not shot from a distance, but killed up close where she could see his eyes go blank. She was going to be sick, but there was no time. More gunshots outside. More shouting. The ranch was still under attack, and she was lying on the floor covered in someone else's blood. Clara forced herself to stand, to pick up the rifle, to move back to the window. The fighting was concentrated near the corrals now. Rhett and his men had fallen back to a defensive position, using the fence posts for cover. The attackers were trying to flank them, but they'd underestimated how well the ranch hands could shoot. One of the attackers went down, then another. The remaining men seemed to realize they were losing. A voice Clara recognized as Marcus Boone's shouted above the gunfire, "Fall back! Fall back!" The attackers retreated, dragging their wounded with them. Within minutes, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the ranch as they rode away into the darkness. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the violence. Clara stood at the window, watching the barn burn, and tried to process what had just happened. Her hands were covered in blood. Her throat throbbed where the man had grabbed her. Her ears rang from gunshots. She'd killed 2 men tonight, maybe 3, if the first one she'd shot outside hadn't survived. The front door opened. Clara spun, raising the rifle on pure instinct. Rhett stood in the doorway, covered in soot and blood. His eyes went wide when he saw her. "What the hell happened in here?" Clara looked down at herself, at the blood on her hands and dress, at the body on the floor, at the broken window and splintered railing. "I held the house," she heard herself say. Rhett crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Clara stood rigid for a moment, then collapsed against him, the rifle clattering to the floor. She wasn't crying, she was shaking too hard to cry. "You're alive," Rhett said into her hair. "I saw the broken window and I thought, I'm alive." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious. Sam took a bullet to the shoulder, but he'll live. Tommy got burned trying to save the barn. We lost the barn. We lost—" He stopped, seemed to recalibrate. "We lost the barn and some supplies, but we're alive. You held them off here while we held them off there." Sam appeared in the doorway, his arm in a makeshift sling. His eyes went wide when he saw the scene inside. "Miss Whitmore did this." "All of it," Rhett confirmed. Sam let out a low whistle. "The Boston schoolteacher just outfought 3 outlaws. That's going to be one hell of a story." "It's not a story," Clara said sharply. "It's not. I'm not—" Her legs gave out. Rhett caught her before she hit the floor, carried her to the sofa. Someone brought water. Someone else brought a blanket. Clara drank the water and stared at the wall while Rhett dealt with the bodies, with the man she'd tied up in the kitchen, with securing the ranch. Dawn broke gray and cold over Red Mesa. The barn was a smoking ruin. Blood stained the snow in dark patches. But everyone was still alive, and Marcus Boone's gang had been broken. Clara sat on the porch, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and watched the sun rise. She'd survived. They'd all survived. But the cost was written in scorch marks and bullet holes, and the weight of knowing she could kill when she had to. Rhett sat down beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "I don't feel brave. I feel sick." That's the difference between courage and stupidity. Courage knows the cost. Rhett's voice was rough. "You did what needed doing, saved yourself, and probably saved the rest of us by keeping them from getting control of the house. Does it get easier to live with? No, but you learn to carry it." Clara turned to look at him. In the early light, she could see new lines around his eyes, new tension in his jaw. The violence had cost him too. "What happens now?" "Now we rebuild. Fix what's broken. Hire more hands. Keep going." Rhett paused. "And you decide if you want to stay or if this was too much." Clara thought about Boston, about her old life, about the person she'd been when she stepped off that train. That woman seemed impossibly far away now, like someone she'd read about in a book rather than someone she'd been. "I'm staying," she said. "You sure?" "No, but I'm staying anyway." Rhett nodded slowly. Then, surprising her, he took her bloody hand in his and held it. They sat together on the porch, watching Red Mesa wake up to face whatever came next. They buried the 2 dead outlaws the next morning in unmarked graves at the edge of the property. The third man, the one Clara had tied up, had been turned over to the territorial marshal who'd finally shown up 3 days after the attack, just in time to take credit for cleaning up someone else's mess. Marcus Boone and the survivors of his gang had vanished into the wilderness, probably headed for Canada or Mexico, smart enough to know they'd lost this fight. Clara stood at a distance during the burials, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She'd killed those men. The weight of that sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and unchanging. Rhett had tried to tell her she'd had no choice, that they would have killed her and everyone else on the ranch without hesitation. She knew he was right. Knowing didn't make the weight any lighter. After the burials, the real work began. The barn was a total loss. Nothing but charred timber and ash. They'd managed to save most of the horses and equipment, but winter supplies had been destroyed, along with tools and tack they couldn't afford to replace. Sam's shoulder wound kept him off heavy work for weeks. Tommy's burns healed slowly and painfully. And the ranch was hemorrhaging money they didn't have. Clara learned all this by accident, overhearing Rhett and Sam talking in low voices in the office late one night. She'd come downstairs for water and had frozen outside the door when she heard the numbers they were discussing. "We're 3 months from broke," Sam was saying. "Maybe 4 if we stretch it and nothing else goes wrong." "Something else will go wrong. It always does." Rhett's voice was flat with exhaustion. "We lost 6 head of cattle in the attack, scared off twice that many. The barn needs rebuilding before next winter. We need to hire at least 3 more hands to replace Pete and the 2 who quit after the attack. Could take out a loan." "From who?" "The bank in Black Hollow won't touch us after what happened. Word got around that we're trouble. No one wants to lend to a ranch that might get burned down by outlaws." Clara's chest tightened. She'd known things were bad, but not this bad. Not on the edge of losing everything bad. She retreated back upstairs before they could discover her eavesdropping. But sleep was impossible. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind working through possibilities. Red Mesa was dying. Slowly, but dying. And she was living on a sinking ship, cooking meals for men who might not have jobs in a few months. Unless someone did something. The next morning, Clara was up before the bell. She cooked breakfast mechanically, her mind elsewhere. After the men had eaten and dispersed to their work, she found Rhett in the office, bent over ledgers that told the same story Sam had outlined the night before. "I heard you and Sam talking last night," she said without preamble. Rhett looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "How much did you hear?" "Enough to know this place is in trouble. Real trouble." He leaned back in his chair. "We'll figure something out. We always do." "Will you?" "Because from what I heard, you're 3 months from losing everything you've built here." "That's not your problem to solve." "The hell it isn't." Clara stepped into the office, shut the door behind her. "I live here, I work here. If Red Mesa goes under, where do you think that leaves me? Back in Black Hollow, begging for work from people who already think I'm worthless?" Rhett's jaw tightened. "I won't let it come to that. I'll find a way to... To what? Take out a loan from banks that won't lend to you? Sell cattle you don't have? Rebuild a barn with money that doesn't exist?" Clara crossed her arms. "You need a different solution, something no one's thought of yet." "I'm open to suggestions." Clara had been thinking about this all night, turning an idea over in her mind until it either seemed brilliant or completely insane. She still wasn't sure which. "There's an old trading post about 2 miles from here. I saw it on one of my walks. It's abandoned, falling apart, but the structure is still standing." Rhett frowned. "Henderson's old place. Been empty for 5 years, ever since he moved his operation closer to town. What about it? Reopen it. Turn it into a supply station for travelers and other ranches. Somewhere people can buy provisions, get information, rest their horses. Right now, anyone traveling through this area has to go all the way to Black Hollow for supplies. That's a full day's journey. But if there was a place closer, they'd use it," Rhett finished, understanding dawning on his face. "It would bring in steady income independent of the cattle operation. More than that, it would bring in people, information, connections, and if we're smart about it, we could offer other services too. Meals for travelers, basic medical supplies, maybe even a small boarding room for people who need a place to stay overnight." Rhett stood up, moved to the window. Clara could see him working through the idea, testing it for weak points. "It would take capital to get started. We'd need to repair the building, stock it with supplies, hire someone to run it." "I'll run it." He turned to look at her. "You're already working yourself to death in the cookhouse. Then hire someone to help with the cooking. Tommy's sister is looking for work. He mentioned it last week. She could handle basic meals for the ranch hands. That frees me up to focus on the trading post. Claire could feel momentum building behind the idea, making her speak faster. Think about it. This ranch is isolated, which makes it defensible but also cuts it off from opportunity. A trading post changes that. It makes Red Mesa a destination instead of just another cattle operation struggling to survive. And if it fails, then we're no worse off than we are now. But if it works, it could save this place. Rhett moved back to his desk, pulled out a different ledger. Henderson's building is on public land. We'd need to file a claim, get approval from the territorial office. That takes time and money we don't have. How much money? Filing fees, bribing the right clerk to push the paperwork through, probably $200 total. Clara's mind raced. I have money. Rhett looked up sharply. What? I have money. Not much, but some. I've been saving my wages since I got here, $30 a month for 3 months. I've spent almost nothing because I live on the ranch and eat what I cook. I have $87. That's not enough. No, but it's a start. And I'll bet some of the ranch hands would pitch in if they knew it might save their jobs. Clara pulled out the chair across from Rhett and sat down. Let me talk to them. Let me explain the plan. If we can raise $200 between all of us, we file the claim and get started. Rhett studied her face for a long moment. You're serious about this? Dead serious. Why? You could leave. Take your saved wages and find work somewhere safer, somewhere that's not teetering on the edge of collapse. Clara had asked herself the same question 100 times over the past sleepless night. The answer wasn't simple or pretty, but it was honest. Because for the first time in my life, I'm building something that matters. In Boston, I was a cog in a machine, easily replaced, teaching children who didn't want to learn from books their parents forced on them. Here, the work is brutal, and the men complained about my cooking for weeks, and I've killed people. Her voice caught. But it's real. It's mine. And I'll be damned if I let it fall apart without fighting for it. Something shifted in Rhett's expression. Not quite a smile, but something warmer than his usual careful neutrality. All right, he said. Talk to the men. See if they'll invest in their own futures. If you can raise $150, I'll put in the rest from my personal savings. Clara stood up, suddenly energized despite her exhaustion. I'll have it by the end of the week. She did it in 3 days. The men were skeptical at first. Ranch hands didn't typically have savings, and asking them to gamble what little they had on a risky venture seemed like a cruel joke. But Clara had learned how to read these men over the past months. She knew Tommy missed his family and would invest anything that kept him employed near his sister. She knew Jake was proud and would hate the idea of losing his position through circumstances beyond his control. She knew Sam had a wife in a distant town who he sent money to every month, and keeping that money flowing mattered more to him than anything. She talked to each man individually, explaining the plan, showing them the numbers as best she understood them. Some refused immediately. Others sat silent for long stretches, chewing over the decision. But slowly, commitments trickled in. $5 here, $10 there. Tommy contributed $15, his entire savings. Jake put in $12. Even the men who couldn't contribute money offered labor, promising to work on the trading post in their spare time. By the third day, Clara had $163 in commitments. She brought the news to Rhett that evening, spreading the papers with each man's pledge across his desk. He looked at the papers, then at her. You did it. We did it. This is everyone's risk now, not just yours. That's what worries me. If this fails, it won't fail. We won't let it. Rhett filed the claim the next week. The approval came back faster than expected, probably because the territorial office was surprised anyone wanted to claim an abandoned building in the middle of nowhere. Within 2 weeks, the deed was official and work began. The building was worse than Clara remembered. The roof had partially collapsed. Windows were shattered. Years of weather had warped the wood and weakened the structure. But underneath the decay, the bones were solid. The men worked on the trading post during spare hours and Sundays, their one day of rest that they gladly sacrificed for the chance at saving their jobs. Clara worked alongside them, learning to hammer boards and patch holes. Her hands developed new calluses on top of old ones. Her back ached constantly. But the building slowly transformed from a ruin into something functional. Tommy's sister Sarah arrived in early spring. She was 19, quiet, competent, and utterly unimpressed by the rough surroundings. Within a week, she'd taken over the cookhouse and somehow made it run more efficiently than Clara ever had. The men complained less about the food. Clara suspected this had more to do with Sarah being pretty than her cooking being better. But she didn't care about the reason as long as it worked. With Sarah handling the cookhouse, Clara threw herself into preparing the trading post. She traveled to Black Hollow, swallowing her pride to enter the town that had rejected her, and negotiated with suppliers for goods on credit. The store owners were skeptical until she mentioned she represented Red Mesa Ranch. Apparently, surviving an outlaw attack had given the ranch a reputation for toughness that translated into creditworthiness. She bought flour, sugar, coffee, tobacco, ammunition, basic tools, fabric, and a dozen other items travelers might need. She bought them on terms that seemed fair until she sat down and did the math. They'd need to sell nearly everything at a profit within 3 months just to make the first payment. The pressure should have crushed her. Instead, it felt clarifying. Every decision mattered, every dollar counted. There was no room for mistakes. The trading post opened on a warm day in May. Clara had spent the previous night arranging merchandise, cleaning surfaces, making everything look as professional as possible. Rhett had built a sign that read Red Mesa Provisions in neat letters. They mounted it above the door at sunrise. Then they waited. The first customer arrived around noon, a lone traveler headed west who'd heard about the new supply station from someone in Black Hollow. He bought coffee, ammunition, and dried beef. Clara took his money with shaking hands, made change from the small lockbox they'd designated as the cash drawer, and thanked him with a professionalism she didn't feel. After he left, she and Rhett looked at each other. "One customer," Clara said. "That's a start." "That's more than 0. 3 more customers arrived that afternoon, 2 the next day. By the end of the first week, they were averaging 6 customers daily. Not enough to turn a profit yet, but enough to prove the concept worked. Word spread. Travelers started planning their routes to include a stop at Red Mesa Provisions. Other ranchers sent their hands to pick up supplies rather than making the longer journey to Black Hollow. Clara added services, hot meals for travelers, a small area with benches where people could rest, a message board where folks could leave notes for each other. The trading post became a gathering place, a source of news and gossip, a landmark that travelers referenced when giving directions. And slowly, painfully, it began to turn a profit. Not enough to save the ranch overnight, but enough to stop the bleeding. Enough to make payroll. Enough to buy materials to start rebuilding the barn. Enough to prove that Clara's crazy idea might actually work. Summer arrived, hot and dusty. The ranch found its rhythm again. Cattle operation during the day. Trading post open from dawn until dusk. Everyone working themselves half to death, but working towards something tangible. Clara saw less of Rhett during this period. He was always out on the range, dealing with cattle, managing the men, handling the 1,000 small crises that came with running a ranch. When he was around, he was buried in paperwork or so exhausted he could barely speak. But sometimes, late at night, she'd find him in the office with his poetry book. And sometimes he'd look up when she passed by, and something unspoken would pass between them, an acknowledgement of what they'd built together, of how far they'd come from that frozen day at Black Hollow Station. One evening in late July, Clara was closing up the trading post when a well-dressed man arrived on horseback. He was older, maybe 50, with the look of someone who spent more time in offices than outdoors. "Are you Miss Whitmore?" he asked. Clara's guard went up immediately. "Who's asking?" "My name is Charles Thornton. I own a cattle operation about 50 miles east of here. I've heard interesting things about what you've done with this place." "We're just selling supplies to travelers." "You're doing more than that." Thornton dismounted, looked around with an appraising eye. "You've created a hub, a meeting place, and from what I hear, you did it with almost no capital and in just a few months. That's impressive." "Thank you, but I'm not sure what you want, Mr. Thornton." "I want to talk business." "Not here, though." "Where's Rhett Callahan?" Clara pointed toward the main ranch house. "Up there." "But anything you want to discuss with him, you can discuss with me first. I'm his partner in this venture." Thornton's eyebrows rose slightly. "His partner? Interesting. No offense, Miss Whitmore, but I was told you were the cook." "I was. Now I'm more than that. Clara crossed her arms. State your business or leave. I have work to finish. Direct. I like that. Thornton pulled a folded document from his coat. I'm looking to expand my operation, and I need to move cattle through this territory to reach the rail line. Your ranch sits right along the route I need. I'd like to negotiate passage rights and possibly a partnership on future drives. Clara's mind raced. Cattle drives meant drovers, which meant customers, which meant income. But it also meant strangers moving through their land, potential disruptions, risk. I'll need to discuss this with Mr. Callahan. Of course, I'll wait here. Clara practically ran to the main house. She found Rhett just finishing supper, looking tired but content. She burst in without knocking. There's a man at the trading post who wants to negotiate passage rights for cattle drives. Rhett was on his feet immediately. Who? Charles Thornton. Says he owns a ranch 50 miles east. I know who Thornton is. He's legitimate. Runs one of the biggest operations in the territory. Rhett grabbed his coat. What did you tell him? That I needed to talk to you first. Good. Let's hear what he's offering. They walked to the trading post together, the evening air warm and thick with the smell of grass and dust. Thornton was waiting patiently, examining the merchandise Clara had arranged. Callahan, he said when they entered. Good to finally meet you. I've heard stories. Most of them probably true. Rhett shook his hand. Miss Whitmore says you want passage rights. I do, and I'm willing to pay fairly for them. $200 per drive plus a percentage of any cattle we sell at the rail yard. We'd be moving herds through about 4 times a year. Clara did the math in her head. $800 minimum, plus percentages. That could rebuild the barn, hire more men, maybe even expand the herd. Rhett's expression gave nothing away. Why us? You could take the southern route, avoid Red Mesa entirely. Southern route adds 3 days to the drive and passes through territory where I've had trouble with rustlers. Your land has a reputation now. Word is outlaws stay clear of Red Mesa Ranch after what happened last winter. So their fight with Marcus Boone hadn't just been survival, it had been advertising. Clara felt something like bitter pride at that realization. I'll need to think about it, Rhett said. Of course. I'm staying in Black Hollow for the next 2 days. Send word when you've decided. Thornton tipped his hat to Clara. Miss Whitmore, impressive work here. You've got a good mind for business. After he left, Clara and Rhett stood in the trading post, watching the sun set through the western window. What do you think? Clara asked. I think it's a good opportunity. The money would solve a lot of problems. But letting people move cattle through our land means giving up some control, means trusting strangers not to cause trouble. After everything we've been through, that's hard. Clara understood. Trust had been stripped from both of them, from her by James's betrayal, from Rhett by whatever events had made him the guarded man he was. We can set conditions, she said. Limit where they can move the cattle, require advance notice, maintain the right to refuse any drive if we think it's too risky. You've thought about this. I've thought about everything. It's what keeps me up at night. Clara turned to face him. But I think we should do it. Not just because we need the money, though we do, but because it's another way to make Red Mesa essential. The more people who need us, who depend on us, the harder we are to destroy. Rhett studied her face in the fading light. When did you become a strategist? When I realized cooking biscuits wasn't going to be enough to survive out here. He laughed. A real laugh. Rare and genuine. No, I suppose it wasn't. They drafted the agreement that night, working together at Rhett's desk. Claire suggested clauses. Rhett refined the language. By midnight, they had a contract that protected their interests while giving Thornton what he needed. Rhett sent word to Black Hollow the next morning. The deal was signed a week later. The first cattle drive came through in August. Watching hundreds of cattle move across their land, guided by professional drovers who treated the ranch with respect, felt surreal. Clara stood at the trading post, which suddenly became very busy selling supplies to the drive crew, and marveled at how much had changed since winter. She'd gone from a desperate woman with nothing to someone negotiating business deals and running a successful supply station. Red Mesa had gone from a failing ranch to a key waypoint for cattle operations across the territory. And she and Rhett had gone from near strangers to something she couldn't quite name, but felt in every shared glance and late-night conversation. One evening, after the cattle drive had moved on and the ranch had settled back into its rhythm, Clara found Rhett sitting on the porch of the main house. It was late, past 10, and she should have been sleeping. But sleep had been difficult lately for reasons she couldn't fully articulate. "Mind company?" she asked. He gestured to the chair beside him. "Always welcome." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Finally, Rhett spoke. "I owe you an apology." Clara looked at him in surprise. "For what?" "For assuming you'd quit. When I offered you that job back in January, I gave you maybe a week before you ran back to civilization. I was wrong." "You weren't entirely wrong. I wanted to quit at least a dozen times. But you didn't. Neither did you, even when things got impossible." Rhett turned to look at her directly. In the lamplight from the window, his face was all plains and shadows. "Why did you stay?" "Really, not the brave reasons you told the men or the logical reasons you told yourself. The real reason." Clara took a breath. Honesty had become important to her out here, even when it was uncomfortable. "Because of you," she said simply. "Because you were the first person in my entire life who offered help without expecting something in return. Who saw me at my lowest and didn't take advantage. Who treated me like I was capable of more than I thought I was." She paused. "And because somewhere along the way, working beside you, fighting beside you, building all this together, I stopped being able to imagine doing it with anyone else." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd just admitted more than she'd intended, crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Rhett was silent for so long that Clara thought she'd ruined everything. Then he reached out and took her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. "I fell in love with you that first day," he said quietly. "Watched you standing on that frozen platform, abandoned and broke, choosing to walk into the wilderness rather than beg. I thought, there's a woman with more courage than sense. Exactly the kind of person who'd either die on the frontier or become something remarkable." Clara's breath caught. "You never said anything." "What was I supposed to say? You'd just been betrayed by a man who'd promised you the world. The last thing you needed was another man with intentions." He squeezed her hand gently. "So I waited, gave you time to find your feet, hoped maybe eventually you'd see me as something other than the man who offered you work when you were desperate." "I see you," Clara said. "I've been seeing you for months now. I just didn't know if we... Rhett stood, pulled her gently to her feet. "Clara Whitmore, I am asking you, with no promises except honesty and hard work and a life that will never be easy, will you marry me?" It wasn't the proposal Clara had imagined as a girl. No bended knee, no pretty speech, no guarantee of comfort or safety. Just a scarred rancher asking her to choose a brutal, beautiful life beside him. "Yes," she said without hesitation. Rhett kissed her there on the porch, under the Wyoming stars, and Clara felt something settle into place that had been off-kilter since she'd watched James's train pull away from Black Hollow Station. This was real. This was chosen. This was hers. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at Red Mesa. The ranch hands attended, cleaned up and awkward in their best clothes. Sarah cried. Sam gave a gruff speech about stubborn people deserving each other. Tommy managed to find a fiddle somewhere and played decent music for the celebration after. Clara wore a simple dress she'd made herself from fabric bought at her own trading post. Rhett wore his cleanest shirt and actually combed his hair. It was nothing like the wedding Clara had once imagined. It was better. That night, lying in bed beside her new husband in the house they now officially shared, Clara thought about all the decisions that had led her here. Getting on that train to Black Hollow, accepting work from a stranger, staying through the blizzard, fighting during the attack, opening the trading post. Every choice had been terrifying and uncertain and necessary. "What are you thinking about?" Rhett asked, his voice rough with sleep. "How I used to think my life was ruined when James left me at that station. And now? Now I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me." Clara rolled to face him. "He gave me nothing. You gave me the chance to become someone worth knowing." Rhett pulled her closer. "You were always worth knowing. You just needed the space to prove it." Outside, the ranch settled into night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new problems to solve. But for now, Clara let herself simply exist in this moment. Home, safe, loved, and exactly where she was meant to be. The winter of 1888 came in hard, but Red Mesa Ranch was ready for it. The new barn stood solid and well-stocked. The trading post had weathered its first full season and turned enough profit to pay back the initial investments with interest. Clara had distributed the returns to each man who'd contributed, watching their faces transform from skepticism to something like hope. Money in hand meant their gamble had paid off. It meant they'd built something real. But success brought new complications. The first problem arrived in November, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying papers that bore the seal of the territorial government. His name was Howard Cunningham, and he represented a railroad company interested in laying tracks through the region. Clara was at the trading post when he arrived, helping a customer who needed supplies for the winter. She'd learned to recognize different types of travelers. Homesteaders had a certain look, drovers another, and men like Cunningham wore their money and authority like armor. "I'm looking for the owners of this establishment," he announced, not bothering with pleasantries. "You're looking at one of them," Clara said, finishing with her customer before turning her full attention to Cunningham. "What can I do for you?" His eyes did a quick assessment that Clara had learned to recognize and hate, the look men gave when they decided a woman wasn't worth their time. "I need to speak with the actual owner, the man in charge." Clara felt the old familiar anger rise but kept her voice level. "My husband and I own this operation together. You can state your business to me, or you can leave and we'll pretend this conversation never happened." Cunningham's jaw tightened. Clearly he wasn't used to being spoken to this way, especially not by women. But something in Clara's stance must have convinced him she meant what she said. "Very well. The Continental Railroad Company is surveying routes for a new line connecting Cheyenne to the Western Territories. Your property sits directly in one of the proposed paths. We're prepared to offer compensation for right-of-way access." Clara's mind immediately started calculating. Railroad access could transform Red Mesa from a remote ranch into a major shipping point. It could also destroy everything they'd built if the railroad simply took what it wanted and left devastation behind. "I'll need to see the survey maps and your proposed compensation before discussing anything further." "Mrs. Callahan, I'm offering you an opportunity. You're asking for access to land that's taken years to build into something profitable. That's not an opportunity, that's a negotiation. And negotiations require information." Clara crossed her arms. "You can provide that information, or you can try the southern route and see how the ranchers there respond to men in fancy suits telling them what's best for their property." Cunningham's expression shifted from condescension to grudging respect. "You're not what I expected to find running a frontier trading post. Most people out here aren't what you'd expect. That's generally why we're out here." Clara gestured to the small table in the corner. "Spread out your maps. Let's see what you're actually proposing." They spent 2 hours going over the railroad company's plans. Cunningham was thorough. Clara would give him that. The proposed route would cut through the southern edge of Red Mesa's grazing land. Not the most valuable section, but not worthless either. The compensation he offered was insultingly low. "This isn't enough," Clara said flatly when he named the figure. "It's more than fair market value. For raw land, maybe, but this isn't raw land. We've improved it, fenced it, cleared it of threats. You're not buying empty territory, you're buying years of work." She pulled out a piece of paper and started writing numbers. "Here's what it's actually worth, calculated by what it produces in cattle grazing annually over the next 20 years. Cunningham stared at her calculations. "You can't seriously expect— I expect to be compensated fairly for what you're taking, and I expect ongoing royalties if the railroad profits from freight shipping through this territory. Our ranch makes this route viable. Without the infrastructure we've built, your trains would be passing through hostile country with no support stations." "That's not how these negotiations typically work." "Then perhaps it should be." Clara met his eyes without flinching. "You need this route. We both know the southern option adds days to your timeline and passes through disputed territory. You came here because Red Mesa represents your best option. That's called leverage, Mr. Cunningham. I suggest you recognize it." Cunningham left that afternoon without an agreement, but Clara could see the wheels turning behind his calculating eyes. She'd surprised him, and men like him hated surprises, but they also respected strength when they encountered it. Rhett returned from checking the far pastures that evening and found Clara in the office, surrounded by papers and maps. "Heard we had a visitor," he said, kissing the top of her head before studying the documents spread across the desk. "Railroad company? They want right-of-way through our southern grazing land, offered half what it's worth." Clara leaned back in her chair. "I sent him away to reconsider." Rhett's eyebrows rose. You negotiated with a railroad company? Someone had to. He showed up while you were gone. She looked up at him, suddenly uncertain. Did I overstep? Should I have waited? Are you joking? You probably got us a better deal than I would have. I would have told him to go to hell out of principle. Rhett pulled up a chair beside her. What did you ask for? Clara explained her proposal. Fair compensation for the land itself, plus ongoing royalties on freight shipments, plus guaranteed supply contracts for the trading post to provision railroad workers and passengers. By the time she finished, Rhett was grinning. You're terrifying when you negotiate, you know that? I learned from watching you haggle with cattle buyers. You never take the first offer, never show weakness, and never forget what you're worth. Clara reached for his hand. Is this going to change everything? The railroad coming through? Probably. Question is whether it changes things for better or worse. The answer came 3 weeks later when Cunningham returned with a revised offer that met most of Clara's demands. They signed the agreement in Rhett's office, with Sam and Tommy serving as witnesses. Cunningham looked like he'd swallowed something bitter, but he shook their hands professionally. You're shrewd negotiators, he said. The company won't forget that. Good, Clara replied. We'd hate to be taken for fools. After Cunningham left, Clara and Rhett sat in the office staring at the signed contract. We just made a deal with a railroad company, Clara said, the reality finally sinking in. You made a deal with a railroad company. I just showed up to sign papers. We're partners. Your signature is as important as mine. Rhett pulled her close. I don't tell you enough how remarkable you are, how you've taken this struggling ranch and turned it into something that railroad companies negotiate with. Clara rested her head against his shoulder. I didn't do it alone. Everyone here contributed. But you led it. You saw possibilities no one else did. He paused. That man who abandoned you in Black Hollow, he gave up something extraordinary. His loss was my gain. Our gain, Clara corrected. Everything we've built together. The railroad construction began in spring. True to the contract, Red Mesa Provisions received exclusive contracts to supply the work crews. Clara hired 2 additional workers to help manage the increased demand. The trading post expanded, adding a second room for dry goods and a small kitchen where Sarah cooked hot meals for workers who'd been living on beans and hardtack for months. Money flowed into Red Mesa in steady streams. They paid off debts, hired more ranch hands, expanded the herd, and started making improvements they'd only dreamed about months before. But success attracted attention, and not all of it was welcome. The second problem arrived in June, in the form of Marcus Boone's younger brother. Clara was working late at the trading post, counting inventory, when she heard a horse approach. She glanced out the window, and her blood went cold. The man dismounting looked enough like Marcus Boone to be his twin. Same build, same hard eyes, same aura of barely controlled violence. She reached for the pistol she now kept under the counter, her heart hammering. The man entered slowly, hands visible, making no sudden moves. Mrs. Callahan, I presume. Who's asking? Name's Daniel Boone. I'm Marcus's brother. Claire's finger rested on the trigger. If you're here for revenge, you should know this place is well guarded, and I'm not the helpless woman I was 2 years ago. I'm not here for revenge. Daniel held up his hands. I'm here to apologize. Clara blinked. What? My brothers, Marcus and Cole, they were violent men, mean men. I loved them because they were blood, but I'm not blind to what they were. Daniel took a careful step forward. What they tried to do here was wrong. What Cole did to deserve getting shot was wrong. Marcus starting a war over it was wrong. I just wanted you to hear that from someone in our family. Clara studied his face, looking for deception. She'd learned to read men over the past 2 years, and Daniel Boone looked genuinely pained by his words. Why now? Why come here after all this time? Because Marcus died last month, consumption, up in Canada. Before he went, he told me what really happened that night with the cattle. Told me Cole drew first, that your husband was defending his property, that they were in the wrong. Daniel's voice dropped. He also told me about the siege, about how a woman half his size stood her ground and fought back. Said he'd underestimated you, that it cost him everything. Clara lowered the pistol slightly, but didn't put it away. So you came to deliver his deathbed regrets? I came to deliver my own. My brothers hurt people. They hurt you. If there's any way to make amends, there isn't. Clara's voice was flat. 2 men died here. I killed them. I live with that weight every day. Your apology doesn't change what happened or make it easier to carry. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand, but for what it's worth, Mrs. Callahan, you were justified, and braver than most men I've known. He backed toward the door. I won't trouble you again. Just wanted you to know not all of us are like Marcus and Cole. He left before Clara could respond. She stood alone in the trading post, the pistol heavy in her hand, and tried to process what had just happened. An apology from a boon, acknowledgement of what she'd survived. It should have felt like closure. Instead, it just felt empty. That night, lying in bed beside Rhett, Clara finally spoke the words she'd been holding back for months. I still see them sometimes. The men I killed in dreams, mostly, but sometimes when I'm awake. I'll be working and suddenly I'll remember how it felt when the pistol kicked, or the look on that man's face when... Her voice broke. Rhett pulled her close. I know, I still see the men I've killed too, every one of them. Does it ever stop? No, but it becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you. He stroked her hair gently. What you did was necessary. Those men would have killed everyone here without hesitation. You saved lives, including your own. Knowing that doesn't make it feel better. It's not supposed to feel better. It's supposed to feel like what it is, a terrible thing you had to do to survive. Rhett tilted her face up to look at him. But that terrible thing doesn't define you. Your courage defines you. Your kindness defines you. Everything you've built here defines you. Not the worst moments, but how you kept going after them. Clara let herself cry then, really cry, for the first time since the attack. Rhett held her while she sobbed out months of suppressed grief and guilt and trauma. When the tears finally stopped, she felt lighter somehow, like acknowledging the weight had made it less unbearable. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not telling me I should be over it by now. For understanding. We're both carrying scars out here, Rhett said quietly. That's just part of frontier life, but at least we're carrying them together. The railroad was completed by late summer. The first train rolled through Red Mesa territory on a sweltering August afternoon, its whistle echoing across the grasslands. Clara stood with Rhett and the ranch hands, watching the massive machine pass, and marveled at how much had changed since she'd stepped off a different train in Black Hollow nearly 2 years ago. That train had brought her to abandonment and despair. This train represented possibility and connection. The irony wasn't lost on her. The railroad brought prosperity to the entire region. Red Mesa Ranch became a designated provisioning stop, with trains pausing twice weekly to take on supplies and allow passengers to stretch their legs. The trading post couldn't keep up with demand. Clara hired 4 more workers and still found herself working 16-hour days. But the work felt different now, purposeful, building towards something permanent instead of just surviving. In September, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but hadn't said anything, half afraid that speaking it aloud would make it disappear. But when the doctor from Black Hollow confirmed it during one of his monthly visits to the area, the reality settled over her like a blanket, heavy and warm and terrifying. She told Rhett that evening after supper when they were alone in the house, I'm going to have a baby. Rhett froze, a coffee cup halfway to his mouth. You're sure? The doctor confirmed it, due sometime in April. The cup clattered onto the table as Rhett crossed the room and pulled Clara into his arms. We're going to have a child. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. Are you happy about this? I know we never talked about... Happy? Rhett pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. Clara, you've given me everything. A partner, a purpose, a reason to build instead of just survive. And now a family? His voice cracked. I didn't think I deserved this much happiness. You deserve every bit of it. We both do. They held each other in the quiet kitchen, the weight of the future settling around them. A child, a life they'd be responsible for shaping. It was terrifying and perfect at once. The pregnancy was difficult. Clara worked too hard for too long, refusing to slow down even as her body demanded rest. By December, Rhett and Sarah had staged what amounted to an intervention, barring Clara from the trading post and cookhouse until after the baby came. You're killing yourself, Sarah said bluntly, and possibly the baby. Sit down, rest, and let the rest of us handle things for a while. Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She spent the winter months in the house, reading, sewing tiny clothes, and learning to let go of control. It was harder than fighting outlaws had been. The baby came in late April during a spring rainstorm. Clara labored for 18 hours, attended by Sarah and a midwife from Black Hollow. Rhett paced holes in the floor downstairs, alternating between praying and cursing, until Sarah finally came down and told him he had a daughter. Clara had never felt anything like the exhaustion that followed childbirth, or the overwhelming love when they placed the tiny red-faced baby in her arms. She looked at her daughter, their daughter, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. "She's perfect," Rhett whispered, touching one tiny hand with a finger that looked impossibly large and rough against such delicate skin. "She's ours," Clara corrected. "Perfect or not, she's ours." They named her Sarah Catherine Callahan, after the woman who'd become Clara's closest friend, and after Clara's mother, who'd died before seeing her daughter become whoever this new version of herself was. Young Sarah cried when they told her the honor, then immediately declared she'd teach little Sarah to cook properly. The ranch settled into new rhythms with a baby in residence. Work still happened, but softer somehow, with men speaking in lower voices near the house and bringing small gifts for the baby: a carved wooden horse, a soft blanket, wildflowers picked from the pasture. Clara learned to mother while still running a business, balancing feedings and inventory, lullabies and negotiations. It was impossible and exhausting, and somehow she managed it, the same way she'd managed everything else the frontier had thrown at her. By summer, Clara was back at the trading post part-time, Sarah strapped to her back in a sling while she worked. Customers smiled at the sight of the fierce businesswoman they'd learned to respect now cooing at a baby between transactions. One afternoon in July, a familiar face appeared at the trading post. James Blackwell stepped through the door, older and harder looking than Clara remembered, his expensive clothes now worn and dusty. Clara felt her body go rigid, every muscle tensing for a fight. Then baby Sarah made a small noise, and Clara remembered she was holding her daughter, and something in that reminder steadied her. "Hello, James." He stopped, clearly shocked she'd recognized him. "Clara, I heard you were out here, but I didn't believe—" His eyes took in the trading post, her capable stance, the baby on her back. "You've done well for yourself." "I've survived. There's a difference." James had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology. What I did in Black Hollow, was the best thing that ever happened to me." Clara's voice was steady, factual. "You taught me that people lie, that promises mean nothing without character behind them, and that I was capable of surviving anything. Valuable lessons, even if you didn't mean them as such. I'm glad you— Wait, you're glad I abandoned you? I'm glad I discovered early what kind of man you were. Saved me years of disappointment." Clara shifted Sarah gently. "Was there something you needed, or did you just come to ease your conscience?" James looked around the trading post, at the thriving business, at Clara's confident bearing. "I came because I'm headed west and needed supplies. I didn't expect to find you here." "Life surprises us all. What supplies do you need?" They conducted the transaction with professional courtesy. James paid, took his goods, and paused at the door. "The woman on the train that day—" "I don't care," Clara interrupted. "Whatever story you're about to tell to justify your actions, I don't need to hear it. You made your choices. I made mine. We're both living with the consequences." James nodded slowly. "You've changed. I've grown. There's a difference." Clara rested a hand on Sarah's small back. "Have a safe journey west, James. I hope you find whatever you're looking for." He left without another word. Clara watched through the window as he mounted his horse and rode away, this man who'd once represented her entire future, now barely a footnote in her actual life. Sarah stirred on Clara's back, making small baby noises. Clara reached back to soothe her, marveling at how much could change in 2 years. The woman James had abandoned wouldn't have survived a week on Red Mesa Ranch. The woman Clara had become had built an empire from nothing and defended it with blood when necessary. That evening, she told Red about James's visit. "How do you feel?" he asked carefully. "Nothing. Not angry, not sad, just nothing." Clara poured coffee for them both. "I looked at him and remembered being devastated when he left. But that devastation led to everything good in my life. So what is there to be angry about?" "He still hurt you." "He did, and I carried that hurt for a while. But somewhere along the way, between fighting outlaws and building this place and falling in love with you, the hurt just stopped mattering. Clara smiled. His leaving was the worst thing that happened to me and the best thing that happened to me. Both things are true. Rhett pulled her close, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby between them. I love you, Clara Callahan. Your strength, your intelligence, your refusal to be defeated by anything. I love you too. Your honesty, your loyalty, your terrible taste in poetry. Whitman is not terrible. Whitman is pretentious nonsense, but I love that you read him anyway. They sat together on the porch as the sun set over Red Mesa Ranch, their daughter sleeping peacefully, their kingdom of grass and cattle and possibilities spreading out before them. It wasn't the life Clara had imagined as a school teacher in Boston. It was harder, bloodier, more complicated. It was also completely, perfectly hers. Years would pass. The ranch would continue to grow. More children would come, 2 sons and another daughter. The trading post would expand into a general store, then a small town that people started calling Red Mesa Station. Clara would serve on the Territorial Education Board, fighting to establish schools across Wyoming. Rhett would become one of the most respected ranchers in the region, known for his fairness and the strange poetry book he always carried. But the story that people told, the legend that grew around Red Mesa Ranch, always came back to that first winter, to the abandoned woman who'd arrived with nothing and built everything, to the feared rancher who'd seen strength where others saw weakness, to the siege that had tested them both and the empire they'd forged from survival and stubbornness. Newcomers to the region would ask how it all started, how a Boston schoolteacher had become one of the most formidable businesswomen in the territory. Rhett's answer never changed. He'd pull Clara close, that rare smile crossing his scarred face, and say what he'd said from the beginning. She arrived with nothing but courage. Somehow, that was enough to save us all. And Clara, holding whatever child happened to be nearest, would add with a grin, courage and a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Never underestimate what a woman can do when she stops asking permission and starts taking action. The frontier had tried to break Clara Whitmore. Instead, she'd broken the frontier's rules, carved out her own space, and built a life that defied every expectation. Not because she was perfect or fearless, but because she'd learned the most important lesson the wilderness could teach. Survival isn't about avoiding the hard things. It's about facing them, enduring them, and refusing to let them define who you become. Red Mesa Ranch stood as proof that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best lives. That abandoned women can become queens. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. And that somewhere between Boston and Wyoming, between desperation and triumph, Clara had discovered who she was always meant to be. Not the woman James had abandoned, but the woman who'd built an empire from the ashes of his betrayal and refused to apologize for her own strength. That was the real story of Red Mesa. Not just a ranch that survived, but a woman who'd transformed survival into something magnificent.